HCGChica. This discussion is all about whether or not you can mix vegetables on phase 2 or the very low calorie portion of the HCG diet. This is a question that I get frequently, and it's a good one. So we're going to talk all about that. So first of all, I have 3 questions for you. So the first one is, how much cucumber can you really eat in one sitting? The second question is, how much can you eat of a salad with lettuce, tomatoes, cucumber, maybe some, roasted fennel or roasted radish? How much of that can you eat in one sitting? And the third question is, are those amounts different? And I know for me, they are. So I'm going to give you just a quick answer in case you don't want to listen to the rest of the discussion. So can you mix vegetables on HCG? My personal opinion is that yes, you can, but if you do, you have to be much more aware of how much you're eating. So what I mean is, if you mix vegetables when you're eating, you need to pay attention and make sure that you're not getting overly full and that you're eating until you feel satisfied, but stopping at that point. So in a nutshell, that's basically my take on it. And if you want to stick with me now for my whole discussion on, why Dr. Simeon's talked about eating only one vegetable and just more on all of this stuff, go ahead and listen in. So we're going to talk for a minute about how eating one vegetable at a time is a natural control method, but we're also going to talk about if we can get around that and if we can mix vegetables on HCG, because of course, ideally we do want to keep things interesting if possible while on this protocol. So I can clearly visualize when I was on HCG, making up myself this bowl of chopped cucumber with some salt and a dash of vinegar and no oil, obviously, because you can't have the fat on HCG. And, I remember not eating a whole lot of it. It was okay, but it was kind of like I almost started getting this gag reflex after several bites. I don't know, maybe it's because it just didn't taste that good, or it was just so much cucumber in my mouth, with no other taste to break it up. So as a result, I often would not eat a whole lot of it. Now contrast that with if I make myself a salad while on P2 and I make, lettuce with some chopped little tomatoes and some cucumber, just a variety of other P2 vegetables, that usually would taste pretty good. And I would definitely eat the whole salad. So my main point here is that sticking to one type of vegetable at a time when you're on HCG per meal, I think it creates a natural barrier to overeating while on the diet without having to think about it too much. For instance, weighing and measuring and all of that stuff. It just creates this natural barrier because, most people are not going to gorge on straight cabbage or straight tomatoes or straight fennel, So, of course, it can still happen. It's just, in my experience, you just don't want to eat a whole lot of one type of vegetable by itself. But the question is, is there a way around this where you can both mix your vegetables and, not overeat so that you can make your time on HCG a little more enjoyable and have a little more variety? So that's what we're gonna keep talking about. So first of all, what is the technical rule for phase 2, the very low calorie diet portion, according to Dr. Simeon's? His instructions were that, yes, only one vegetable per meal on phase 2. So if you're having your P2 lunch and you're gonna eat cucumbers, you just eat cucumbers and you don't eat tomatoes with it. For dinner, if you decide to have tomatoes with your vegetable as your vegetable for dinner, then that's the only vegetable you would eat would be tomatoes, and you don't add in any fennel or lettuce or cucumber. So that was his technical rule. But the question is that how it has to be? Is that the only way to do this protocol and to have success? I personally feel that you can mix vegetables, but that if you do, you have to be more cognizant of the amounts of food that you're eating, the amounts of those vegetables that you're eating. making sure, that you're not getting overly full. When you're eating the vegetables, just being more aware and making sure that you're just eating, enough so that you're not hungry. So let me explain that a little bit more. I was asking myself, so why did Dr. Simeon say not to mix vegetables? And I was thinking, he's not here anymore. And wouldn't it be kind of fun to sit him down if he were here and be able to ask him questions, like more details about why he said certain things? Some of the details in his protocol are very specific and he explains the reason behind them. But then there's a lot of other things, like this one, for instance, where he doesn't explain why the protocol is that way. He just says that's the rule. So anyway, I just thought, that'd be so neat if you could, interview him and ask him all the questions that we wonder about. So anyway, I thought about it a lot, and I'm going to give you guys my guess as to why he made that rule. I could be totally wrong, but I'll just tell you kind of what my thought process is about maybe why he said that. You can tell from the way that Dr. Simeons wrote his book, Pounds and Inches, that he wanted the diet to be as simple and straightforward as possible. And to accomplish this, it makes sense to eliminate as much, weighing and calorie counting as possible. His book kind of gave me the feeling that he wanted his patients not to have to think too much about the diet, not to overthink things. And to be honest, for me, the idea of calorie counting, just the idea of it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I hate calorie counting. I've done it a few times for a few days, and it's just a huge downer for me. Emotionally and, and mentally, it's very hard for me. I know some of you guys like to calorie count and it works for you, and I'm really glad about that. But I think there's a lot of other people who it's difficult for. And even aside from that, it makes the diet more complicated when you're having to do all kinds of, weighing and measuring and then adding up and finding out numbers of stuff like that. So it makes it more complicated. And I really do think that Dr. Simeons, he wanted it to be, as simple as possible, where you don't have to think about it, and where you can be out and about doing things and, and handle being on the diet in a reasonable way. So let's imagine this diet the opposite way for a moment, where you do weigh and measure and count all the calories of every vegetable that you eat. Okay? Which actually I did do that my first round. That was the only round that I did do this because it was a pain to me. So your lettuce must equal 60 calories worth. You need to go online to figure out the nutritional data for how many calories is in romaine lettuce versus butterleaf lettuce, so that you can then proceed to step 2, which is to measure out the accurate amount of lettuce on your scale to add up to 60 calories worth, adding one more leaf of lettuce at a time until you get to the right number. Because of course you don't want to eat less than you're allowed, right? So you're going to make sure you get the full 60 calories worth. Your apple must be 2.15 inches in circumference, no more, no less, and you're getting frustrated as you walk around the grocery store with your measuring tape trying to find the proper size apple, as well as the right type of apple, since of course different types of apples have more or less sugar in them, which means they will have more or less calories in them. That does not sound like a pretty picture, does it? Yeah, no. HCG is hard enough. I think if you add in too many details like that, it can quickly become really overwhelming and really discouraging. And really, the whole point is, when you're done with the diet, is to not have to be so consumed with everything that you're eating. Of course, you want to have basic principles that you're going by, but to have to be that consumed it's not the way you want to have to live your life, right? And part of phase 2 is really training yourself for your healthy habits that you are developing for later. You're really kind of changing what you used to do. You're taking out the way you used to do things and you're replacing it in phase 2 with a new way of living. So anyway, I just wanted to share that little story. I know it's definitely not that drastic. Like I said, my first round, I did actually, figure out all the calorie counts of the vegetables, and I weighed it out and I would put it in like MyFitnessPal, and I did measure out my vegetables on the scale, but it was just definitely a lot more involved, and I just came to find that it really wasn't necessary to do that. Additionally, if you think about it, when Dr. Simeons wrote the protocol, whatever, back in the 50s, they didn't have MyFitnessPal, they didn't have the internet, so finding out calorie counts of all those different vegetables and the certain amounts, I mean, that would have made, he would have had to include that in his protocol in his book, and I mean, that would just be, a bunch of pages of, all these different amounts, and I don't know, it just seems like it would have been really overwhelming. So, contrast something overwhelming and kind of a little too complex like that, which I know that I made it sound a little more complex than it probably really is. But anyway, just for the sake of illustration, contrast that with a simpler, more straightforward way of doing the diet that does work. For Dr. Simeons to make the diet as simple as possible, it was supposed to equal about 500 calories a day. It wasn't actually an exact number, which what I talk about in a minute will help make that more clear. But by doing it that way, it would make the diet a lot more doable for a lot more people. And, he obviously found it unnecessary to make more rules about it than he did. That's the way he administered the protocol, and it worked for his patients. So, I think it can work for us as well, not having to be quite so detailed. So basically, on the diet, we have the protein, the fruit, and the vegetables. And then, of course, there's like the melba gracini that sometimes people eat. A lot of people end up not eating that, but that was specific. So, first of all, with the protein, that was kind of necessary to actually weigh, because it's a very calorie dense food. And you also want to make sure that you don't have too little protein as well, because that would obviously affect, how much your body retains muscle. So it was very important that the patients did weigh the protein. And also, just talking about how the 500 calories was an approximate amount, is because 100 grams of very lean steak has a different calorie count than 100 grams of shrimp or white fish. And that is because there actually is, a little more fat in the beef versus the shrimp or white fish. So, so there were different calorie counts for the same 100 grams. And obviously he knew that, but he still just decided to stick to a very simple 100 grams of protein from this specific list. And when you did that, combined with going along with the other stuff, your total calorie intake for the day would end up being around 500. Some days it would be less. If you had shrimp and white fish on a day and no steak, it would probably be less than 500 calories on that day. And then if you had beef, if you had beef and then shrimp on one day, your calories would be a little more. He just basically said not to exceed 500 calories. But again, since he wasn't having people weigh vegetables, I think this was still an approximate amount. And by having people stick to one vegetable, like we talked about earlier, that you usually don't overeat one type of vegetable. That was a natural control mechanism to keep your calorie count within those 500 calories without having to count every single morsel going in your mouth. Then when it came to the fruits, he kept it simple by just kind of going by a general size. Handful of strawberries, half a grapefruit, one apple. I mean, he didn't even say the size of the apple mattered. He said it didn't matter if it was small or large, just that you shouldn't eat more than, one apple. So he kept it really simple and straightforward, so you could just, eyeball it, grab it, and go and be done with it. So in my mind, his instructions are just specific enough I wrote this down and I can't remember what I was going to say. Basically just to ensure that the calories wouldn't be too high to fit into that 500 calorie amount, while at the same time not having to get overly obsessive about weighing and measuring and checking the size of stuff. Then lastly, we get to the vegetables. And the vegetable, they are the lowest calorie by volume of the foods on the protocol, and they're also the lowest carb by volume outside of the meat, of course. So that's kind of the perfect group of foods, the vegetables, to have like the most freedom with on the diet. And again, it seems just like a natural control mechanism to prevent overeating of the vegetables, simply by just kind of making a blanket rule, like stick to one vegetable per meal. And that way, you're not going to be binging on lettuce. You're going to eat some of the lettuce and then you're going to be like, you know, it's okay, and I'm done with that, and I'm gonna move on to the rest of my day. So basically, when you mix vegetables, you know, whether it's in a salad or, you know, a little bit of a saute or a soup, I think the amount of food that you end up consuming can much more easily become too much and could hamper, you know, your results on the protocol. And so, again, I know I've already said this a couple times now, but I kind of think Dr. Simeon's basic intention there was to keep the diet simple, and that natural control mechanism to limit it to one type of vegetable per meal would kind of keep it so that you wouldn't end up overeating. So that's kind of that's my guess in a nutshell of what he was thinking. Again, could be totally wrong. But anyway, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? At least it could be one reason. So with that said, as I mentioned earlier, I do feel that you can mix vegetables, but like I said, that you do need to be more aware of how much you're eating. You have to be kind of consciously thinking about it when you're eating, and not mindlessly just eating this huge bowl of stuff, you know. And so let me tell you now how I did it, because I did mix vegetables on at least a few of my rounds. So I'll just tell you my experience with that. So, you know, myself, I actually did mix my vegetables on at least a few of my rounds, maybe at least 3 of my rounds. I did mix them. And so what I did was I was just very aware of how much I used. I tried to use just a little bit of each one. And I really tried to pay attention when I was eating to not just eating, you know, everything that was there because it was there, but stopping when I felt satisfied and not getting overly full. I really did try to concentrate on that. And I'll just mention here that on my final round of HCG, round 5, I didn't eat the fruits on P2, and I actually incorporated more types of vegetables, which I'll talk about that in more detail in another video, but I did include some off-protocol vegetables. Part of the reason I chose to do that was because I felt like by taking the fruits out, which was helping me not crave sugar, which I actually have another video about that, about why I chose not to eat the fruits in P2. I'll actually link to that in the article that goes with this discussion, in case you're wondering about that. But so I felt like that gave me more freedom because, you know, there's a lot of the carbs from the diet are in those fruits. And by taking them out, I thought, okay, I think there's a few other vegetables I might be able to include here to keep a little variety. But even when I did that, like for instance, if I made a P2 salad, I would do, you know, the lettuce, and then I might have like some raw mushrooms, and I would actually use even a little carrot. Yes, a little carrot. But I'm telling you, it would be like a quarter or a half of a carrot, like a really tiny amount that I would kind of like shave into my salad just to give it a little more flavor, a little more taste. But again, very consciously, you know, thinking about the amount. I didn't just take a whole carrot and scrape it in there and then a whole, you know, a whole box of mushrooms, and, you know, I didn't do that. And I would have gotten really full if I did that, and I do think that would have affected my results. So just by, you know, paying attention, just using a little bit and eating to that point where, okay, I ate enough, you know, I feel satisfied, I don't need to eat more, even if that means that there's food left in your bowl. That can be hard to do, by the way. I don't think I'm actually very good at that, but anyway, that's what I attempted to do my 5th round, and I feel like that was very useful and helpful, and I think basically that makes it a doable way to mix your vegetables without hampering your results on the diet. So the last thing I want to talk about is when should you stick to one type of vegetable or to counting out the calories of your vegetables. So if you're having trouble listening to your hunger cues, and you're finding yourself kind of getting overly full, you know, eating the vegetables and mixing vegetables and stuff like that, that might be a time to think about maybe sticking to just the one type of vegetable, or to, you know, figuring out the calorie count of your vegetables and kind of so that you can find out for yourself just how much you're supposed to be eating. Ideally, I think the hunger cue thing is what we want to get to. But, you know, when you start this HCG journey, we're all in different phases of it, right? So, you know, you may not be adept yet at listening to your hunger cues. You know, it took me a long time actually to not overeat anymore. A long time. It took more than a few rounds to get to that point, because I was in the habit of eating too much food, getting overly full. And so that took a while. So, you know, if you're in that place where you're having a hard time responding to that, like you might even think like, okay, I'm just right. I feel satisfied, but I'm not overly full. But then you still find yourself wanting to eat more. You know, that might be the time to stick to the one vegetable, because like I said, it's just really not as appetizing in general. Some of the vegetables are more appetizing than others. I probably could eat a lot more cherry tomatoes than I could plain cucumber. But you know what I mean? That is kind of a natural way to keep yourself in check while you're kind of learning these new, you know, principles for healthy eating and a healthy life. Or you can figure out the nutritional data. Thankfully, you know, since we do have things like MyFitnessPal, a lot of the P2 vegetables, if you go search, you know, things online, people have already entered that type of stuff in there, and so you can find it fairly easily. Ideally, again, I think, you know, you want to not have to do that. I think in most cases it's probably not necessary, but it is good to just do what works for you, you know, because we're all in different points of this journey. We're each different people as well. And I really find that you will do best when you honor and respect who you are at this moment inside and work with that versus, you know, trying to do something else. And sometimes the only way you'll know is by trial and error, right? You try one way and you're like, okay, that's not working for me. Let me try another way. And eventually you'll kind of figure out your own groove that works for you. So anyway, I hope you guys found that helpful. Yeah, you know, like I said, I think the whole point here is to not just think about losing weight and I'm on a diet and then not thinking about the future. This protocol is helping you guys, and it helped, you know, helping me to really change the way we look at our bodies and at food and our relationship with it. And that's why trying to get to that point where you're more in tune with your hunger, you're not quite so obsessive with, you know, certain calorie counts and you know, weighing of food and stuff. We want to try to get away from that eventually, because that whole point is to be able to live a long-term life where we're not having to be, you know, that obsessed with food. So anyway, that's just kind of my concern with, you know, getting too obsessive about the amounts and the calories and the weighing of everything, because I feel like it could lead to a little bit of obsessiveness that might not be healthy. And then that's going to be like one more thing, you know, that you're going to have to try to learn to break away from in the future. But again, you know, everybody's different. I totally respect, just do what works for you. For myself, I'm glad that I don't have to calorie count. Oh, I'm just so glad. That's just something I don't like to do. So anyway, you guys can find me on Facebook, HCGChica, my blog and website, of course, HCGChica.com. And if you want to be kept up to date with my latest posts, I also send out just kind of special short little motivational emails to those on my email list. So the best way to get in on that, if you would like to stay motivated and be helped in that way, is to actually join my email list, which if you go to my blog, you'll see various places in order to do that. So anyway, I hope that helps, and you guys take care. Bye.